What happens when a routine traffic stop turns into a fight for justice? Imagine driving down a quiet street, minding your own business, when suddenly, blue lights flash behind you. You pull over thinking it's just another stop. But what if this encounter is more than just a simple traffic violation? What if it escalates into something far more significant, a clash between power and prejudice? Today, we dive into a story that highlights the shocking realities of racial bias and the unexpected twists that can unfold in everyday situations. Meet Judge Vanessa Williams, a respected leader in her community, known for her unwavering commitment to justice. She has spent years fighting against the very injustices that so many face daily. But today, she finds herself on the receiving end of discrimination during a routine traffic stop. Have you ever wondered how a single encounter can shift the course of someone's life? What if the person being pulled over was not just another victim, but someone with the power to change the system? In this video, we will explore the dynamics of a traffic stop gone wrong and the lessons it teaches us about courage, resilience, and the fight against injustice. As we unpack this gripping story, we'll ask some important questions. What should you do if you're treated unfairly? How can one person's experience shed light on systemic issues that affect us all? And why is it essential to listen to and amplify voices that often go unheard? Stick with us as we reveal the chilling moments of the traffic stop, the coach's shocking comments, and the powerful response from Judge Williams. You'll learn about the broader implications of this encounter, shedding light on how racism infiltrates our everyday lives and the ways in which people are challenging the status quo. This video isn't just a story, it's a call to action. We'll dive into the importance of standing up for what's right and how your voice matters in the fight against discrimination. By the end of this video, you'll understand the critical role that each of us plays in creating a more equitable society. So, are you ready to discover what happens when a judge faces injustice firsthand? Can one encounter spark a conversation that could change the world? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this remarkable story of courage and justice. It was a crisp, clear morning in the city, the kind that promised a perfect day ahead. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden glow over the neatly lined streets. Judge Vanessa Williams was on her way to work, her mind buzzing with thoughts of the day's cases. She had always believed in the power of justice, striving to be a voice for the voiceless in her community. As a respected judge, she had seen it all, from heart-wrenching stories of inequality to inspiring tales of resilience. Each day was a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. As she drove, the sound of her favorite jazz station filled the car, soothing her thoughts. She glanced out the window, appreciating the sights of her neighborhood, a mix of vibrant murals and the warmth of familiar faces. This was her home, a place where she felt grounded and connected. But as she navigated through the busy streets, she couldn't shake a feeling that today might be different. Suddenly, her moment of peace shattered. Bright blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, the sharp sound of a siren cutting through the air. Her heart raced. What could this be about? She wondered. She pulled over to the side of the road, her mind spinning with thoughts. She had never imagined that a simple drive could lead to such a jarring interruption. The officer stepped out of his vehicle, a tall man with a stern expression. As he approached her car, she could see the gun holstered at his side. It was a stark reminder of the power he held. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She rolled down her window, determined to remain composed. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he barked, his tone more accusatory than curious. Vanessa sensed the tension in the air. She knew this moment was not just about her speeding or the minor infraction that might have occurred. There was something more beneath the surface, an undercurrent of bias that was all too familiar. "Actually, officer, I'm not sure," she replied, maintaining her poise. "I was just on my way to work." But instead of an explanation, she was met with a barrage of assumptions. The officer began to question her, not just about her driving but about her life. His questions were laced with skepticism. "Are you even from around here? You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood." Vanessa felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. She had spent her entire career fighting against the very stereotypes that were now being thrown at her. Here she was, a judge in a professional suit, yet the officer saw only a black woman behind the wheel. His words stung, a sharp reminder of the biases that persisted even in her position of authority. As the conversation continued, the cop's demeanor shifted from interrogation to condescension. He scrutinized her car, glancing inside as if searching for something to justify his suspicion. Vanessa could feel her heart pounding, the tension palpable. She was not just fighting for herself, but for every person who had been unfairly judged and treated. In that moment, she recalled her experiences in the courtroom, the stories of injustice that had haunted her. The people she had fought for flashed through her mind, those who had faced discrimination without a voice. The officer's ignorance was infuriating, yet she knew she had to stay calm. If she lost her cool, it could escalate the situation. The seconds felt like hours as she prepared to defend herself. How could she turn the tables without risking a confrontation? How could she remind him of her identity and authority? Just then, a thought sparked in her mind. She had the power of knowledge and experience, and perhaps this was the moment to leverage that. She decided to reveal her identity as a judge, hoping it would shift the dynamics of their interaction. But as she opened her mouth to speak, she could see the cop's expression harden. He was unyielding, stuck in his perceptions. As Vanessa sat in her car, the seconds dragged on, feeling like an eternity. The officer stood outside, his silhouette framed by the morning sun. She could see him through her rearview mirror, pacing back and forth, as if he were deciding what to do next. Anxiety knotted in her stomach. This was not just a routine traffic stop. It was a moment that could spiral into something far more significant. Finally, the officer approached her window again, his expression a mix of authority and suspicion. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice cold. Vanessa's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse, but she steadied herself. She was a judge. She had to show strength. As she handed him her documents, she took a deep breath. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, trying to keep her tone even and calm. He barely glanced at the license. Instead, he leaned against her car, his body language suggesting he had already made up his mind about her. "You were going a bit fast back there. This area has a strict speed limit, you know." He smirked slightly, as if he took pleasure in reprimanding her. Vanessa felt her blood boil. "I understand, officer. I was just trying to get to work on time," she replied, emphasizing her professionalism. But the officer seemed unfazed, his demeanor unyielding. He continued to probe, asking questions that felt invasive and irrelevant. "What do you do for a living? You look like you're dressed for something important." The implication in his tone was unmistakable. He was questioning her right to be in that neighborhood, as if her presence alone was suspicious. Vanessa felt a rush of anger, but fought to keep her composure. "I'm a judge," she stated, her voice steady but firm. "I work at the courthouse." For a moment, there was silence. The officer's eyebrows raised slightly, but his expression quickly hardened again. "Yeah. What kind of judge?" he asked, as if he still didn't believe her. "Criminal law," she replied, meeting his gaze head-on. She could sense the tension building between them, the air thick with unspoken judgments and prejudices. Here she was, a person of authority, yet she was being treated like a criminal. The officer's response was sharp. "You don't look like a judge." His words dripped with condescension, reinforcing the racial stereotypes that often plagued her life. The implication was clear. He was unwilling to accept that someone like her could hold such a position of power. Inside, Vanessa's heart raced. How could he not see her for who she truly was? She had dedicated her life to the law, to ensuring justice for everyone, regardless of their background. But in this moment, all he saw was the color of her skin. The emotional weight of her position pressed down on her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the countless others who had been judged unfairly. "Can you please just run my information?" she suggested, trying to diffuse the tension. "You'll see that I'm who I say I am." The officer hesitated but eventually walked back to his car. As he did, Vanessa's mind raced. Would he truly look up her credentials, or would he continue to hold on to his bias? The clock on the dashboard ticked away the seconds, each one feeling like a countdown to an uncertain fate. As she waited, thoughts of her community flooded her mind. She thought of the young men and women who had shared their stories of discrimination, those who had faced similar situations but without the privilege of her position. Would they have remained as calm as she was? Would they have had the same opportunity to advocate for themselves? Vanessa could see the officer speaking into his radio, his back turned to her. She took a moment to collect herself, to remind herself of her strength. She was not just a judge, she was a woman of conviction, and she had a duty to stand up against injustice, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. But then, just as she was steeling herself for the next part of the encounter, she saw the officer turn back toward her, a look of disbelief on his face. "Well, well," he said with a sneer, "looks like we have a real-life judge here. What do you think you can do about it?" The challenge in his tone was unmistakable, as if he believed his authority was absolute. Vanessa felt a surge of determination. This was not just about her identity. It was about breaking down barriers and exposing the truth about prejudice in policing. As Vanessa sat in her car, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. The officer stood at his patrol vehicle, his face obscured by the shadow of the midday sun, but she could sense the disdain radiating from him. She could feel the stares of passers-by, their curiosity thickening the air around her. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It was a moment fraught with tension, and she had to make a choice. The officer returned to her window, his hand resting on his belt, exuding an air of authority that felt more like intimidation. "So, Judge," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "what's it like to sit up on your high horse, judging people every day?" The challenge was clear in his voice, as if he was daring her to respond. In that instant, Vanessa felt a rush of adrenaline. She was no stranger to confrontation, having faced countless battles in her courtroom. But this was different. Here, she was vulnerable, a black woman pulled over by a man who wielded power as if it was his birthright. "I judge based on facts, officer," she replied, striving to keep her voice steady. "And I believe in justice for all." Her words hung in the air, charged with a truth that felt as sharp as a knife. But the officer merely scoffed, rolling his eyes as if dismissing her conviction. "Justice, huh? Is that what you call it when you send people away for years?" He shot back, stepping closer, invading her personal space. Vanessa could feel her heart pounding against her ribcage. It was as if the walls were closing in around her. The air felt electric, charged with the weight of their exchange. She knew she had to shift the narrative. "Actually," she began, her voice rising above the tension, "I've dedicated my career to ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, has a fair chance in my courtroom." "That's true, Justice." The officer paused, his expression momentarily faltering. But he quickly regained his composure, crossing his arms defiantly. "So what? You think that makes you better than me?" He barked, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You think that gives you some sort of immunity?" Vanessa felt a surge of determination. "It's not about being better," she countered. "It's about accountability. I've seen the impact of bias in the system, and I'm here to fight against it." Her voice was stronger now, filled with a fierce conviction that she hoped would resonate with him. But instead of engaging with her words, the officer leaned in closer, his tone low and menacing. "You really think you can change things? You're just a judge. You don't know what it's like out here." The implication stung, a reminder of the barriers that still existed. Vanessa felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to back down. This was not just a confrontation. It was a challenge to the very fabric of injustice that plagued her community. In a moment of clarity, she decided to reveal her identity more firmly. "I have the power to change lives, officer. Every day, I make decisions that impact the future of individuals in this community. I fight for justice." Her words hung in the air like a battle cry. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But it was fleeting, and the officer quickly recovered, determined to maintain his stance. "And who do you think you are?" He spat, his voice rising. "Just because you wear a robe doesn't make you special. It doesn't mean you can walk around here like you own the place." At that moment, Vanessa realized the depths of his bias. It was not just about her being a judge. It was about the color of her skin and the power dynamics at play. She felt a wave of frustration wash over her, but she also felt a fierce determination ignite within her. "Being a judge means I have a responsibility," she said, her tone firm. "I understand the law, and I understand the consequences of actions. What you're doing right now is perpetuating a cycle of fear and prejudice." The officer stepped back, visibly taken aback. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if he might reconsider, as if the weight of her words had penetrated his facade. But then he straightened up, his defenses raised once again. "You're just another black woman trying to tell me how to do my job," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. The words struck Vanessa like a physical blow. She could feel the anger boiling within her, the injustice of the situation crystallizing into a powerful resolve. This was not just about her. It was about every person who had been silenced, every individual who had faced the same bias. In that moment, she realized she needed to take control. "I will not be intimidated," she declared, her voice unwavering. "You may have the badge, but I have the law on my side. This isn't just about you pulling me over. This is about what's right." Her heart raced as she spoke, knowing that this was more than a confrontation. It was a pivotal moment that could resonate far beyond this traffic stop. It was about challenging the status quo, about standing up against the systemic racism that had festered for too long. As the confrontation between Vanessa and the officer escalated, the atmosphere around them became charged with an unspoken tension. The sounds of the city seemed to fade away, leaving only the rhythmic pounding of her heart in her ears. It felt as if time had slowed, and everything hinged on this moment. The truth of her identity clashing with the officer's prejudice. "Step out of the vehicle," he shouted suddenly, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Vanessa's stomach dropped. Did he really intend to escalate this? For a moment, she hesitated, her mind racing. She thought about the implications of getting out of her car. What would happen next? Would this escalate into something dangerous? Yet she also knew that she had to show her strength, to embody the justice she fought for every day in her courtroom. "Why? Because I'm a black woman. Is that why you want to humiliate me?" Vanessa's voice was firm, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But deep down, uncertainty gnawed at her. The officer's authority loomed large, and she felt a flicker of fear about what might come next. With a steely resolve, she decided to comply but kept her movements slow and deliberate. "I'm getting out," she declared, her tone unyielding. As she opened the door, the officer took a step back, clearly surprised by her defiance. When she stepped onto the pavement, the world felt surreal. The sun blazed overhead, but the heat was nothing compared to the tension radiating from the officer. He stood there, his hand still resting on his belt, watching her closely, as if trying to anticipate her next move. "What do you think you're going to do now?" he challenged, his voice tinged with a mix of aggression and uncertainty. Vanessa could see the hesitation in his eyes, and for the first time, she sensed a crack in his facade. "I'm going to tell you that your behavior is unacceptable," she replied, her voice steady. "You're using your badge to exert power over me, and I won't stand for it." For a brief moment, silence hung in the air between them. But then, the officer's demeanor hardened again. "You think you can just walk away from this? I could have you arrested right now." A chill ran down her spine, but Vanessa squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "You know what? Go ahead. Arrest me. But know this, I will not be the one who loses today." As she spoke, her mind raced back to the countless cases she had presided over, each one a testament to the struggles faced by people like her. She thought of the faces of those who had fought against injustice, many who had not been able to stand up as she was doing now. This was not just about her. It was about them. Just then, a couple walking by stopped to watch, sensing the rising tension. They exchanged worried glances, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief. The officer glanced at them, his bravado wavering for a moment. Vanessa seized the opportunity. "Look at them," she said, pointing towards the couple. "This isn't just about you and me anymore. This is about every person who has been pulled over for no reason, every person who has felt the weight of prejudice. You have a choice here. Do you want to be part of the solution or continue being part of the problem?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, caught off guard by her words. For a moment, she could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Was he beginning to understand the gravity of the situation? Or was he merely biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to reassert his authority? Suddenly, he pulled out his radio and called for backup. The crackle of the speaker sent a wave of unease through Vanessa. Her heart raced, but she stood firm, her gaze unwavering. The prospect of more officers arriving sent chills down her spine. Would this turn into a chaotic scene, one where her voice could be drowned out by the badge and uniform of the system she had fought against? "Is this really necessary?" she asked, her voice rising with frustration. "Are you really going to make this a bigger issue than it already is, just because you can?" With her words hanging in the air, the tension escalated further. She could feel the eyes of the passers-by upon her, their whispers floating in the air. Was this how it felt to be on display, the focus of an unjust system? She refused to let fear take hold. A second officer arrived, his demeanor calm and collected. He assessed the situation, his eyes darting between Vanessa and the first officer. "What's going on here?" he asked, sensing the charged atmosphere. "She was speeding," the first officer stated, his voice defensive. "But she's also a judge, and she thinks that gives her the right to talk back." The second officer looked at Vanessa, and she took the opportunity to share her truth. "This isn't about me being a judge. It's about being treated with respect and dignity. I deserve to be treated fairly, just like anyone else on the road." As she spoke, Vanessa could feel a surge of empowerment. This was her moment to shine a light on the systemic issues that plagued the community. She wouldn't let this officer's bias define her or allow it to go unchecked. The second officer nodded thoughtfully, and Vanessa could sense a shift in the air. Perhaps there was a chance for understanding, a chance for a dialogue rather than a confrontation. But the first officer, sensing the shift, bristled at the attention and stood firm. "I'm just doing my job," he spat, frustration evident in his tone. "You think you can come down here and lecture me?" Vanessa realized then that the first officer had built walls around himself, walls that could be difficult to breach. Yet, she also recognized that she had to continue pushing back against the injustice. "Your job should be about protecting and serving," she countered, "not about bullying those who are vulnerable. If you really want to do your job, let's talk about how we can work together to create change." As word spread about the tense confrontation between Vanessa and the officer, the air in the community became charged with emotion. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened. In coffee shops, community centers, and even online forums, conversations erupted. How could a respected judge face such blatant disrespect from someone sworn to protect and serve? This wasn't just an isolated incident. It felt like a crack in the system that had long been ignored. Vanessa was already known for her work advocating for justice, but this situation turned her into a symbol for many. She became the face of a struggle that countless individuals experienced daily. In her neighborhood, people began to rally around her. They shared their own stories of encounters with law enforcement, stories filled with fear, humiliation, and a longing for change. One evening, a community meeting was organized in the local gymnasium. The room was filled with concerned faces, mothers, fathers, young adults, and elders. They were all there because they wanted to address the issue head-on. Vanessa stood at the front, her presence commanding respect and attention. She could feel the weight of their hopes resting on her shoulders. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "What happened to me could have happened to any one of you. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us." The murmurs of agreement swelled in the room. Vanessa shared her experience, each word carefully chosen to paint a picture of the injustice she had faced. She spoke about the fear that had gripped her, the doubt that crept in when the officer threatened her, and the overwhelming need to stand firm in the face of oppression. "I've seen too many people suffer in silence. We can't let fear keep us from speaking out. We have to unite and demand change." Vanessa's voice rose, echoing with conviction. The crowd erupted in applause, their spirits ignited by her words. But amidst the support, there were whispers of dissent. A few members of the community remained skeptical. "But what can we really do? The system is against us," one man said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Change starts with us," Vanessa replied, her passion evident. "We have to hold our leaders accountable. We need to demand training for officers, community workshops, and regular discussions about racial bias. We can't let this incident fade away as just another story." The room fell silent, tension swirling in the air. The challenge was daunting, but Vanessa could see flickers of hope in the eyes of her neighbors. They were tired of feeling powerless. Slowly, hands began to rise. One by one, people shared their experiences, their voices breaking through the wall of fear that had kept them silent for so long. A woman stood up, her voice trembling but strong. "I was pulled over last year for no reason. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." Her story resonated deeply with everyone in the room. It reminded them that Vanessa's experience was not an anomaly, but a reflection of a broader issue plaguing their community. The atmosphere became electric, a mix of sadness, anger, and determination. Vanessa knew they were at a tipping point. This was the moment they could transform their pain into action. They brainstormed ideas, creating a list of demands they could take to local leaders, pushing for a community policing initiative. As the meeting wrapped up, Vanessa felt a sense of unity forming among them. People who had once felt alone were now banding together, empowered by the shared experience of injustice. They formed committees, planned rallies, and scheduled meetings with city officials. There was a fire in their hearts that couldn't be extinguished. But just as hope blossomed, the shadows of doubt crept back in. Would their efforts be met with resistance? Would the authorities listen to their demands, or would they dismiss them as just another community squabble? The uncertainty loomed large. Days turned into weeks, and Vanessa became a beacon of hope in the community. Social media buzzed with hashtags and posts supporting her cause. Articles began to appear in local newspapers, highlighting the movement she had ignited. But with the increased attention came pushback. Some individuals rallied against her, claiming she was stirring up trouble, undermining the very law that protected them. One day, as she walked through her neighborhood, Vanessa was approached by a local journalist eager to interview her. "What's next for you?" he asked, notebook in hand, a glint of curiosity in his eyes. "We're not backing down," she replied, her voice steady. "We're going to keep pushing for justice. We will make sure that every voice in our community is heard. This isn't just my fight. It's our fight." The journalist nodded, impressed by her determination. But Vanessa could sense the challenges ahead. The more she fought for justice, the more she would face resistance, and she steeled herself for the battles to come. Weeks later, the day arrived for their first public demonstration, a peaceful march through the city. The streets filled with supporters, their chants echoing in the air. Vanessa felt a swell of pride as she stood at the front, flanked by her neighbors, many carrying signs emblazoned with messages of justice and equality. But as they marched, the atmosphere changed. A group of counter-protesters emerged, shouting derogatory remarks, trying to drown out the voices demanding change. Tension surged, and Vanessa felt her heart race. This was the moment of truth. Would the peaceful demonstration turn chaotic? Would their message be lost in the anger and hate? As the two groups faced off, Vanessa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She raised her hands, signaling for calm. "We're here for peace. We're here to demand justice," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. As the days turned into weeks, Vanessa felt the weight of her mission pressing down on her shoulders. The rally had sparked a fire in the community, but with it came a flood of challenges. She often found herself awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her thoughts. What if her efforts to fight for justice only led to more hostility? What if she couldn't make a difference? Despite the doubts creeping into her mind, she knew she had to push forward. Vanessa began meeting with community leaders, activists, and legal experts, each conversation fueling her determination. They spoke about the need for systemic changes, police training on racial bias, community engagement, and accountability. The more she learned, the more she realized how deeply rooted the issues were. It wasn't just about her experience. It was about a system that often turned a blind eye to injustices. One afternoon, while meeting at a local cafe, Vanessa met Marcus, a young activist passionate about social justice. He had been following her story closely and was eager to help. "We need to get people involved, get them to see what's at stake," he said, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "Let's organize workshops, educate people about their rights." Vanessa nodded, inspired by his energy. Together, they began planning a series of community workshops. They aimed to empower individuals, teaching them how to navigate encounters with law enforcement and understand their rights. But the deeper they delved into organizing, the more they realized how many barriers lay in their path. As they began promoting the workshops, Vanessa received unexpected pushback. Some community members questioned her intentions. "Why stir the pot? Things are fine as they are," one elder said during a community meeting. The skepticism stung, but Vanessa refused to back down. She reminded herself that change often meets resistance. "Fine. How can we call it fine when we fear for our safety?" she responded, her voice steady yet tinged with frustration. "If we don't talk about these issues, they'll never get better." Despite the skepticism, the first workshop was scheduled. On the day of the event, Vanessa's heart raced as she entered the community center. Would anyone show up? Would they be interested in learning about their rights? The room filled slowly, people shuffling in, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. As Vanessa took the stage, she could feel the room's energy shifting. She started by sharing her own story, recounting the traffic stop and the fear that had gripped her. Her words resonated, breaking the ice. One by one, hands shot up as people began sharing their own experiences. The stories poured out, frustrations, fears, moments of injustice. "You're not alone," Vanessa assured them, her heart swelling with empathy. "We're in this together." The connection among the attendees grew, and what started as a workshop transformed into a support group, a safe space where they could voice their concerns. However, the night was not without tension. Midway through the workshop, a man stormed in, eyes blazing with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, interrupting Vanessa. "You're making it worse for all of us." Gasps filled the room as everyone turned to look at him. Vanessa's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Sir, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here to find solutions." He glared at her, the tension palpable. "You think talking is going to change anything? The system won't listen to you." "But we have to try," she replied, her voice unwavering. "If we don't speak up, nothing will ever change." After a moment that felt like an eternity, the man stormed out, leaving the audience silent. Vanessa felt a mix of relief and anxiety. How could they move forward if people remained divided? Undeterred, she pressed on. Over the next few weeks, the workshops continued and attendance grew. Each session became a beacon of hope, filled with laughter, tears, and shared resilience. Vanessa's heart swelled with pride as she watched her community come together, people who once felt isolated now standing shoulder to shoulder. But with each success came a haunting realization. The backlash was growing. Anonymous threats began to surface, and Vanessa received messages warning her to back down. "You're making a mistake," one read. "Leave it alone before it gets worse." The fear crept in, gnawing at her resolve. She confided in Marcus during one late-night planning session. "What if I put everyone at risk? What if my fight for justice brings danger to those who support me?" Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Vanessa. We'll stand together. We're stronger as a community." The reassurance bolstered her spirit, but the threats lingered in the back of her mind. Vanessa knew they had to take action. They decided to document the threats, sharing them with local law enforcement in hopes of securing protection. The officers, however, met them with skepticism. "Are you sure you want to pursue this? It could escalate the situation," one officer warned. Vanessa's frustration bubbled to the surface. "We're not going to live in fear. We deserve protection and justice." As the weeks rolled on, Vanessa's resolve grew stronger, her passion infectious. News of the workshops spread beyond the community, drawing attention from local media outlets. People began to reach out for interviews, eager to hear her story. Vanessa shared her experience with the world, shedding light on the need for change, and each interview fueled her mission further. Yet, with increased attention came increased risks. Vanessa found herself feeling constantly on edge. She received calls from reporters asking for updates, but the worry weighed heavy on her heart. Would the spotlight she had drawn to her community put them all in danger? One evening, while heading home after a long day of organizing, Vanessa noticed a car following her. Her heart raced as she glanced in the rearview mirror, the headlights glaring menacingly. Was it just her imagination, or was someone watching her? As she turned down a side street, the car kept pace. Fear clawed at her gut, but she refused to let it paralyze her. Vanessa took a deep breath and made a sharp turn, heading toward a nearby police station. Her pulse quickened, and she prayed she could lose the tail. The car hesitated, then abruptly turned off, leaving Vanessa breathless. She parked in front of the station, her heart racing. She had to keep going. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions.